Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket meets Mike Fink Snapping Turtle, retold by Karan Lee Cohen. In the early part of the 19th century, a man named Mike Fink lived along the Mississippi River. In fact, he made his living along it. Fink was a keelboatman, one of the strong-armed, strong-backed, bulb-headed fellows who floated flatboats down the river to New Orleans. At the mouth of the Mississippi, Fink and his mates would reload the keelboat with cargo and bring it up to St. Louis and beyond, propelling the boat forward against the current by pushing down with all their might on long poles. Life along the river was rough and tough, and Mike Fink was one of the roughest, toughest parts about it. To make sure everyone knew just how tough he was, he always wore a red turkey feather stuck in the brim of his hat. Half of me is wild horse and half is alligator, and the rest is crooked nails and red-hot snapping turtles, he'd shout, whenever and wherever he had the chance. They say Fink never lost a fight, but then he hadn't ever met up with Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket. Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket lived long ago near the Mississippi River. Her husband was Davy Crocket. Now that lady was made of thunder with a little dash of whirlwind. She wore a beehive for a bonnet and a bearskin for a dress. Her toothpick was a bowie knife. She could stomp a litter of wild cats and smash a band of starving wolves. She could outscream an eagle and outclaw a mountain lion. She could skin a bear faster than an alligator swallows a fish. She walked like an ox and ran like a fox. She could wade the wide Mississippi without getting wet. And she could jump over the Grand Canyon with both eyes shut. She could do just about anything, and nothing on earth scared her. Nothing. But she never bragged, and she never fought a man, woman, or critter for no good reason. Now Mike Fink lived along the Mississippi, too. He was a bad man, always looking for a fight. He could beat any man except his enemy, Davy Crocket. Their fights ended in a draw. And when Mike Fink wasn't fighting, he was bragging. One day Mike walked into a tavern. He jumped on a table and roared, "Half of me is wild horse and half is alligator. And the rest is crooked nails and red-hot snapping turtles. I can outrun, outshoot, outfight any man. If any man says that's not true, let him step up and fight." No man dared to fight bad man Mike Fink. But Davy Crocket was in that tavern, and he was sick of hearing Mike Fink brag. "You don't scare me," Davy said, "and you couldn't even scare my sweet little wife, Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket." Mike roared, "I'll bet you a dozen wildcats that I can scare her teeth loose." And the bet was made. So one evening, by the river, Mike found an alligator. He skinned it and crept inside the skin. Then he crawled along the river, and there was Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket out for her nightly walk. Mike crawled towards Sally Ann. He poked the alligator's head here and there. He opened its jaws wide, big and wide. He let out a horrible cry. He nearly scared himself out of the alligator's skin. But Sally Ann wasn't scared. Not one little bit. She just stepped aside as if that alligator were a dead stump. So Mike crawled closer and stood up on his hind legs. Then he threw his front paws around Sally Ann. Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket didn't let just any critter hug her. Her rage rose higher than a Mississippi flood. Her eyes flashed lightning. The night sky lit up like day. Mike was scareder than a raccoon looking down a rifle barrel, but he thought of his bet with Davy Crocket. He kept circling Sally Ann and wagging his tail. "That's enough, you worm," said Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket, and she pulled out her toothpick. With one swing, she cut off the head of that alligator. It flew 50 feet into the Mississippi River. Then she could see it was just bad man Mike Fink playing a trick. "You lowly skunk," she said, trying to scare a lady out on her nightly walk. "Now stand up and fight like a man." She threw down her toothpick and rolled up her sleeves. She battered poor Mike till he fainted. She was still in a rage, but she wouldn't touch a man who was down, so she just walked off. Mike didn't wake up till the next day. He couldn't tell his friends he had been beaten by a woman. Instead, he bragged. "I got swallowed by an alligator, but I was chock full of fight and cut my way out. And here I am." Still, a bet was a bet. So he caught a dozen wildcats and gave them to Davy Crocket. But that wasn't the end of it. One night by the river, Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind Crocket met bad man Mike Fink. Her rage rose higher than a Mississippi flood. She lit the light sky with lightning from her eyes, and this time it scared Mike Fink's teeth loose. From then on, bad man Mike Fink had a mouthful of loose teeth, and every time he bragged, those teeth rattled.